대담은 아무래도 영어로, 제가 뭐 영어는 잘 못합니다. 영어로 해야 되겠죠? 통역 부탁드리고요. Let me start by thanking President Park Chun-nan of NHI for giving me this wonderful opportunity to engage with the excellent scholars who gave us really thought-provoking talks earlier. Both Professor Bouckaert and Dr. Woolcock gave a tour de force of the main issues faced by the public sector in today's world. Professor Bouckaert focused mainly on the advanced country perspective, if I may say so, which is natural given that he's representing the OECD schools of government, a network of schools of government, right? And he emphasized the need to utilize a combination of different models of governance, hierarchy, markets, and networks, especially building partnerships based on trust to cope with the problem of moving targets. Dr. Woolcock, coming from the World Bank, which is to fight poverty and help developing countries. He pointed to the enormous challenges of effective implementation. So naturally, he's more concerned with the developing country perspective and the challenges of capacity building. Not in the conventional easy ways, but the real hard work of learning through practice and building team capacities. Let me start with a question for you, Professor Bouckaert. Since you are a Belgian, you are close to Netherlands, right? Yeah. Not too much different from the Dutch, I guess. It occurred to me, when I was a graduate student, long time ago, I was on a flight from Boston to Amsterdam, and there was an American sitting next to me, and we were talking, and I asked him, what he was doing in Amsterdam, and he said he was working for an American firm based in Amsterdam, and he was somehow, we began to talk about the cultural shock we experienced. As a Korean, of course, I was experiencing huge cultural shock, first living in the US. And I was wondering, what kind of cultural shock do you have as an American going to Europe, which looked to me the same, more or less the same? And he said, no, the culture is so different. And he mentioned two things I still remember. One is that these Dutch people are very organized, not as spontaneous as the Americans. They plan everything, going to movies, soccer matches, and everything far ahead. And another thing was the consensual decision making. American firms, it's top down, very hierarchical. Even in academia, we see that. But the Dutch firm, the American firm, which is based in Amsterdam, which is run by a Dutch local CEO, based on consensual decision making, which was a cultural shock to him. The reason why I'm talking about this is Korea is more like the United States in this respect. We rely more on hierarchy and markets rather than partnerships and networks. It seems to me, I'm not an HR person, I'm not a public sector person, as a public administration person. I really don't know much about it, but that's my sense. And so I was wondering, how you can cultivate the capacities of the public sector officials for working through networks, for cultivating partnerships, doing better in terms of that you mentioned. Can you offer us a lesson?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's a very provoking question because it's actually about cultural differences and how culture impacts implementation too. And I think you are rightly saying that culture is crucial, and one of the reasons why copy-pasting doesn't work is because we have the cultural differences. And so you could perfectly apply the best practices which work in one country and bring it to another country, and it would absolutely fail. And it has to do with the cultural differences. This is probably for another conference to compare the US with other countries. I think that would be an entire conference in itself. And I beg to absolutely disagree with you, if I may say so. I absolutely disagree that Korea and the US have similar cultures.
Only in the sense of relying more on hierarchical.
Well, I can give you the data. I didn't show data here, but if you look at Hofstede's dimensions of culture, of course, Korea, not of course, but when you look at the data for Korea, it has a very high power distance, and it has a high uncertainty avoidance compared to the US. And so from that point of view, I think the power distance is very hierarchical, so that you are quite right. That could have, let's say, that could become a tension with equal partnerships if you have very outspoken power distances between actors. The second thing is uncertainty avoidance. It's a bit of a complex word, but it actually means that imitation is easier than innovation, because innovation is taking risks and being prepared to have failure. And to have failure is leads to shame and shaming and blaming. And so that becomes a problem if you test, experiment, and things fail, to try to test creative solutions. If you have a higher level of uncertainty avoidance, which is rather low in the US and high in Korea, so that's a major difference to test and experiment for solutions. And as a consequence, I think the US and Korea, I've always been fascinated why this strong link is. And of course, Europeans love certain parts of the US, let's put it that way. But I think, and we speak English, so we have this expression in Belgium, since you referred to Belgium, we are divided by a common language. So that's the expression we use. But the point I want to make is that it's difficult to change cultures, and sometimes it takes generations to change cultures, but sometimes you have to adjust to the culture to be effective. Let me give an example. If we're talking in the range of human resources on performance-related pay, I'm not in favor, personally, of performance-related pay. I mean, all the evidence shows that it doesn't really work. But I've seen the mismatch in Korea of performance-related pay, where they have imitated US solutions, because if you look at what do you reward if you have performance-related pay, it could be individuals or teams. My colleague mentioned the shift. We have to move from individuals to teams. That's a very important one for partnerships. The team thinking, the we thinking is important. The Korean culture has more a we thinking than an I thinking, which is also different with the US. And so if you would align your performance-related pay to individuals, you would run into trouble if you come and apply this in a culture which is more we culture. And so the mismatch is if you have individual-based performance-related pay in a society with a culture that has more a team and a we culture. And that has happened in some cases in the Korean case. So the conclusion of this here is that you have to adjust the instruments you use and the network instruments to the culture. And that's why copy-pasting will never work. And the Koreans should look to similar cultures and should certainly look to the region and to themselves. That's why I like the intra-country comparisons are important here, but also the intra-regional comparisons to look for solutions and to share these solutions within the country, because the chances are higher to have similar cultures within a region, within a country, rather than comparing it with something which is on the other side of the world. And so networks, of course, they can work in Korea, and the assets you have is that you have a we culture. The problems that may emerge is that you have high power distance and that you have high uncertainty avoidance. That means it's difficult to treat equals and to talk among equals. If to speak up, for example, the speak up function is difficult if you have high power distance. So to say that something is going to go wrong is very difficult in a high power distance country. If you combine that with uncertainty avoidance, where the culture does not facilitate experiments and failure is very human. Innovations, when they succeed for 90%, they're not innovations. Innovations, by definition, fail. More innovations fail than succeed. That's why there are innovations. And so we have to accept failure, and we have to be generous. We should not experiment with society, that's not what I'm saying, but we have to be cautious here.
Okay. Since you mentioned performance pay, actually I've been a vocal critique of overuse of or abuse of performance pay. And since Dr. Woolcock emphasized the need for team capacity building rather than individual capacity building, that also connects to the issue of performance pay. There has to be some reward punishment structure to encourage public sector to develop more capacities. But if you emphasize team capacity building, how do you do that? And also, if you can offer any of your thoughts about my first question to Professor Bouckaert.
I guess I'm a little nervous, I'm a sociologist, I'm a little nervous about talking about national cultures. I think the more interesting sort of unit of analysis is to look at small c cultures within different parts of big organizations. So the logic of what I was saying before about this variation everywhere applies to different organizations within a university, within Samsung, within LG. I mean, if I would wager a lot of money that there's just big variation in terms of how all those different groups perform, and then their own small c culture, the sense in which they have a collective sense that they are in this together. And I think that's a really big challenge for many countries in the world, that people don't perceive that they're even a citizen of a particular country. I won't name those particular countries, but there are places where I've worked where it's just not a salient part of their identity to think that they should cede taxes, cede authority to people walking around in blue uniforms called the police, that they should have the right and responsibility of pulling them over when they've gone too fast in their car, right? And we think that's normal, so that we would cede that kind of authority because people like us are part of a bigger collective, and we recognize that there are certain people who have this difficult job of trying to constrain the illegal or dangerous behavior of particular citizens. But That's kind of magical, actually, that we do that. It took a long time for humans to construct that social contract, as it were, between citizens and their state. And one of the big perennial challenges in any country is not just that broadening of people's identities and their loyalties, but the more vexing challenge of having multiple forms of identity, that you have an identity built up from your family, identity about your people that might share your own particular religious tradition or not. You have loyalty about your employer, you have loyalty to perhaps to people you play golf with, you have all these different identities that can make different claims on you. And I think that is the very big development challenge, is that it requires people to assume very, what we call polyvalent, many different forms of identity, different hats that people have to put on and take off depending on the role that they're playing. And when you work for the public sector, you have to wear a very particular kind of hat. A hat that says, I work in the interests of the public good. I work in the interest of working to make my nation a better place rather than just make myself personally rich. And so, then back to your second question, is sort of, I think part of what we're trying to stress in our work on state capability is that rather than just sort of treating people as sort of, not to say rats, but sort of parts in a machine who just respond in some reflexive way to a pretty crude systems of rewards and punishment. Most people who are working in the public sector are doing it by self-selection because they believe in the broader public good, and they probably could make more money working in the private sector, and they know that. So I don't think these big material incentives, as the research as you've shown suggests, make that big of a difference. But that doesn't mean that this human element of respect, of appreciation, of letting people know that their hard efforts are valued when most other people probably don't even know about it. That sort of small C culture of working in an environment where that kind of thing and those kind of practices towards each other are taken seriously. There was a really nice paper a few years ago by a colleague of mine who works in Ghana, and was a wonderful big study of the Ghanaian bureaucracy, and she was able to do really interesting field work like an anthropologist, and she would go back to some of these ministries at 10 o'clock at night, and she would see lights on in the buildings, and she would say, wow, those guys up on the 10th floor are still here at 10 o'clock at night doing their job. Is that because they're getting paid more, or because they have created this culture where they just really love their job, where they're valued for what they do, as difficult as it may be, and they feel appreciated for what they're doing? And it turned it quite out. So it had very little to do with what they were being paid, and everything to do with this culture, but not a Ghanaian culture, a culture of this particular part of the Ministry of Finance that was just all in on being able to collectively solve problems. And so if there's a big metric that I would want to use more frequently, at least in these kinds of discussions, it's sort of not these big distant outcome variables about whether kids are learning more, because that's, as I said, is a function of all these different things coming together. What we can do as individuals is just look at the types of problems that we encounter and keep on solving them. And that high functioning systems are just really, really good at anticipating and solving problems. That's that's our definition of a high functioning organization. There's a great concluding episode for the movie The Martian, which some of you may have seen, starring Matt Damon, who plays this Martian that goes off to Mars and he gets stuck there, right? And the final scene, as you may recall, if you've seen this movie without giving the whole thing away, he survives, he comes back, he's a hero. All the young astronauts are huge fans. Wow, the great guy has come back, and they're asking this questions. So, how did you make it? How did you survive for so long when you were literally on another planet and you made it back here? What did you do? And watch that movie and listen to his answer. What is his answer? Because I'm a great person? Because I got paid more money? Because I had a better degree than you do? No, he says, I solved one problem, and then I solved another one. And I kept on solving problems, and I knew that if I kept on solving problems, maybe I would get back alive. And I think that's beautiful, because I think that's the essence of a lot of this kind of work, is that we should be really socially rewarding people's willingness and ability to be able to solve problems.
Great. Let me wrap up this little discussion by this way. Of course, culture, any culture has a lot of different elements, and within even within the same organization, different groups of people may develop different cultures and so on. I was referring to my observation that Korean bureaucracy tend to have, historically had more hierarchical decision making, and that may not be very effective in moving in the direction of working through networks and forging partnerships and so on. And so in trying to go from here to there, maybe we should take advantage of the pervasive we culture that Korea has, and also encourage these organizations keep on solving problems one after another. And so let me ask you, Dr. Woolcock, to give us more details about what did you call problem-driven iterative adaptation approach. I mean, what you were saying was at least some time ago, the typical image of World Bank was an organization that promoted a one-size-fits-all approach and this outside intervention and so on. But now you are emphasizing precisely the opposite approach, which I welcome greatly. But please expand.
No, that's a very astute reading of. I didn't say as much, but my part of my presentation is a soft, or when I'm giving a similar talk at the World Bank, perceived as a more not heretical, but at least a challenging response to an organization that, like most big organizations, is set up as a big pyramid, and it wants to be directed from the top, and it wants to. And the higher you are in that pyramid, the more you self-expect almost that your job is to be the great leader and the person who tells other people what to do. And I think the essence of a large part of our work is recognizing that those structures are necessary. We're not sort of trying to do some sort of outsourcing, lateralizing, or private sectorizing of the public sector. It's more about how could we use people in positions of power to authorize and protect the innovation space, right? Which is very different from being the person that tells everybody what to do. Your job is to protect a space rather than fill a space, right? If you're an expert, you desperately want to fill a space because it makes you feel like an expert. Experts tell you what to do. When you go to a doctor takes your blood pressure and your heart rate, asks you a few questions, and if they think they're really good, the faster they can tell you what is wrong with you, the better. That makes them an even better doctor, right? And I think a large part of the essence of these problems is not obvious what the problem is, and it's not obvious what the solution is. And thinking that because you have a high position in the hierarchy, that somehow gives you special knowledge or special powers to be able to divine what the problem is and then tell people what to do in response to it. Well, there are some problems in the world that need to be addressed like that. If you're suffering from hyperinflation, right, it helps to have a central bank filled with 24 people that know what they're doing, who can divine from the data whether interest rates should go up by 1/4 point or not, right? We don't need to delegate that. We just not a big sort of problem-solving apparatus you need to do that. You just need to have a very well-insulated, well-trained, technocratic class that recognizes and has all the models at their disposal to be able to respond to that problem in that way. But for so many of the other problems we face in the world, imagining that, if only we had the equivalent indicator of an interest rate that we could tweak by 1/4 point and watch the world rotate around that one number, then somehow we would be more seriously taken, that we would be able to function more effectively. So that's part of the problem of thinking like that. A large part of the problem of doing this work is like raising children, being a good spouse. I mean, all these problems aren't reducible to scorecards and annual performance reviews. They're lived. They have to be done as part of it and experienced as part of a team. And to the extent that you have authorizing and financing and political power within your organizational structure, part of it is to do that work of making tough decisions and commanding and tell people to do things, because that's sometimes very necessary. But the essence of a large part of the emerging set of challenges that both Geert and I mentioned is that so much of these are unforeseeable, and when we encounter them, it's not clear what we respond to them. And the most wicked of all those problems, by definition, are problems for which we don't know what the answer is. So that has to be created, and you have to authorize teams to do that. And as Geert also rightly said, that means failing. That means not doing things right. And nobody wants to be a manager who's presiding over a team of people that fail 80% of the time, right? That doesn't look good. Your own superiors up higher above you are then going to be criticizing you for running this slapshot organization where people 80% fail with what they're supposed to be doing. Nobody wants to do that, right? So we go with the things that we know already, or we go with something that someone else told us is the right way to do it, so that if we get hauled before some committee to explain our profligate behavior, our defense will be, oh, I'm just doing this because the expert told me that was the right way to do things, and then you think you're off the hook, right? All these emerging problems that we've been talking about so far are all problems that don't map neatly onto a solution. That solution has to be created. And that's going to mean that a lot of people are going to try really hard to do the right thing and just are not going to succeed. And as a manager, that's going to not look good for you in the short run, but the wager is in the medium and long run, out of that process, the price of getting the right answer is failing a lot of the time. And that's really hard. It's actually, though, if you look, and I have read some of the corporate histories of Toyota and Hyundai and Samsung, and these are companies that figured out how to use powerful leadership to let people try out and explore these things. And just got to keep doing that.
Okay, that's powerful explanations for why we need to emphasize learning by doing, learning by practicing, learning by experimenting, and being creative and empowering organizations to do that. I think you have some.
Yes, to follow up and to add to what Michael rightly said, I think the role of professionals remains very important. You mentioned teachers and doctors. I mean, we can expand that. I think we have perhaps in our schools of government overemphasized managers and administrators, and we have to bring back the professionals and combine it with, as Michael also said, public service motivation. I think to combine strong professionals with strong public service motivation in a context of the public sector, and I think that's value added created. Professionals know what they're doing, and there has been a kind of tension in some cases between the professionals and the managers. And the question is, do we upgrade the professionals to the manager, or do we get managers from outside running a hospital or a school or whatever? And that creates tensions. And I think I'm very much in favor of professionals being transformed and being not upgraded, but changing their roles to add to their role to become manager, because they're in a better position to understand, and it's more legitimate when professionals are also included in the system of governing the systems. But public service motivation becomes important for the selection, for the training, for the movement around the system, and so that also spreads a culture. If you move professionals around organizations, and be reassured, Michael, I do not just believe in national cultures, so it would be very scaring if one would do so. I think I believe in professional cultures very much, and I think that's a crucial element to upgrade, and schools of government have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, one more quick question to you. This morning, we learned that the Chilean government just announced that it would cancel the hosting of APEC summit meeting, which is a big international event. And the reason for that, of course, is many of the citizens of Santiago feel the sense of being left out that you mentioned, right? This is a big challenge in many places around the world. And I guess we do suffer that problem to some extent. And so do you have any thing to offer in terms of how we can address this problem?
Well, that's the 1 million whatever currency prize is, and I think it's actually an attitude and a societal culture too, to be generous and to say only inclusive policies are the policies we should have. OECD had a ministerial conference on inclusion in Helsinki. Even developed countries are wrestling with this. So this is not a monopoly of whatever country, of type of country, to have that. It's about distribution of wealth within countries, because we see internal migration, we see migration between countries. So it's an exit strategy. Hirschman made the categories of loyalty, voice, and exit. I think we are seeing exit right now, and the exit can take different shapes. It can be extreme voting behavior. It can be violence with hooliganism. It can be migration. I think there is an immense societal cost for that. And I think we should make clear as societies that inclusive policies are actually, if we want to put it in economic terms, only in economic terms, sometimes you have to do it. We do not always have the privilege to be surrounded by social scientists who understand what's really going on, I think. We have to say that inclusive policies are in the long term sustainable, more sustainable than exclusive policies. And I think, and sometimes it takes time for them to be aware of that. And so I think we have to repeat it, and we have to create cultures of inclusion. That means also, trying to have maps of who is excluded there within countries. And as I said, it could be rural versus urban, it can be ethnic, it can be social stratifications. We have to have the courage to have audits, evaluation of our policies, oversight institutions, research, saying in a very transparent way, this is what is going on. If we move in this direction with our policies, we are going to create huge problems. And I think the speak up function becomes important here.
Okay. I ran out of the time, but I wanted to give the audience a chance to ask questions. So one question each to each of the keynote speakers. So Professor Kim, since you raised your hand first, you get the right. Is there a microphone
Yes,
for him? Could you identify yourself and tell us who your question is directed to?
Okay. I am Taejong Kim from KDI School, and I'd like to give my question to Michael. From the two presentations, two keynote speeches, we saw prominence given to such keywords as partnerships, networks, problem-based, iterative, adaptive interactions. So I think what that means for the schools of government is the need to get out of the classroom, to be a part of the partnerships. But in the meantime, we have to run schools of government, and I'm sure both Professor Bouckaert and Professor Woolcock are teaching, giving classes. What things can we do to bring that process into the classroom?
Great question. Well, I think part of it, when I teach this, I say I'm trying to impart skills and sensibilities, right? Skills like how to do stuff, and sensibilities, how to think about these things in constructive ways. So the reason I opened my talk by thanking the people that had booked my plane ticket and all the rest was to say part of the sensibility of being part of a public sector is just being appreciative of the fact that so many other people, beyond just the ones you know about, need to be doing what they do to make the whole system function. One of President Kennedy's famous anecdotes was going to NASA, to the big headquarters of where they were building the rockets, and he came across a man who was clearly a janitor, right? He just carrying a broom, and he was looking just like that was his job. But the president very generously said to him, "Sir, tell me your name and what you do." And he said, "Well, my name is Robert, and I help put men on the moon." And I thought, wow, right? What a culture you have created if even the janitor says, I'm not here to clean the toilets, I'm here to help put people on the moon. Because if I don't clean the toilets, then the toilets block up. In effect, he didn't say this, but this is the essence of it. If the toilets aren't clean, then the whole system, our office stinks and we can't function, we can't do our job. So it falls to me to clean the toilets, but if I do my thing, that's my humble little contribution to this larger enterprise. And I think, so it's teaching those kinds of things, I think is really important. But as you mentioned, one of the implications is also that well, partly to just read about what people who've had real responsibilities and real hard decisions to make actually did, because I think it's just, you cannot teach that. So many of the brave people that are the whistleblowers that we're seeing right now around the world, geez, that's hard to do that, right? That those are very, very brave people, not in terms of taking bullets in war, but in terms of standing up for the ethos of public servants to do what they do. So helping people celebrate and recognize that the heroes of the story shouldn't be the technical whiz kids that have PhDs that crunch the data and find the right answer. The people who are the equivalently or even better heroes are the ones that do the right thing when it's hard. So that and then just spending a lot of time in organizations and seeing the different ways in which these problems get solved, that there are so many different pathways to better ways of doing things, and recognizing that that's part of what it takes to be a good problem solver. It's not just zeroing in on one way of doing things, recognizing that teams of people can come up with so many different ways of doing things.
Okay. You want to?
Let me give you a very clear, short, and precise answer to your question. Why don't you reorganize your schools around the Sustainable Development Goals? And you start by saying, this is our problem in poverty, in gender, you start from the problem, and then you reverse to say, of course it has a legal dimension, it has an economic dimension, it has a competence dimension, it has a distribution of labor dimension between levels of government and so on. Why don't we all start rethinking in a Copernican change and organize our teaching around the SDGs? I think that would be a good start, wouldn't it?
Wow, that's a great suggestion. Yes, the lady.
Thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Dr. Marion O'Sullivan. I'm the Director General CEO of the Institute of Public Administration in Ireland. Many of you may or may not be aware we went through a very difficult recession process and have had substantial reform. My question to either of the speakers is, what is your definition of failure? I come from a research science background, and one of the things I like to encourage my staff is to experiment, because every experiment gives you an answer. It may not be the answer you're looking for, but it's part of solving the problem. And I hear at these events about the fear of failure, and I think we use a very negative word, and how can we change that?
I'll give again a short, precise answer, I hope. I think it's, when I said most of innovations fail, that's actually one of the theories. There's another theory to say, even if they fail, they don't fail, because we can learn from it and build upon it, and so we can recycle the failure experienced for new experiments or whatever. So from that point of view, it's broadening the definition. But I think the key issue is responsibility and accountability. Who is responsible for what and who is accountable for what? If you are working with public money, if you are working, with people and society, and to have a culture of responsibility, to marry it with a culture of accountability, to be transparent on why things have failed and how you are coping and managing to reform and to do better next time. I think that's the only way to do it. There is a legal implication here sometimes, but there is also a cultural implication to say not all cultures, we have cultures of guilt and cultures of shame. And I think, but the important thing is in a rule of law, state of law, rule of law, to marry responsibility and accountability. And I think that's the bottom line of taking responsibility and being accountable and move forward.
Excellent answer to a difficult question. let me use my authority as a moderator of this panel discussion to cut the lunch time a little bit and take 2 more questions. And the gentleman here, actually, wasn't it you who kept raising?
Yes.
Was it you?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Raed bin Shams, Dr. Raed bin Shams, President of the International Institute of Administrative Sciences and the President of the MENAPAR, which is a network in the Arab region, and the Director General of the Institute of Public Administration in Bahrain. In the world of VUCA, the volatile, complex, uncertain, and so on, speed nowadays is also needed. However, going for the COCOCO or the PDIA is definitely needed for innovation and bringing people together. But doesn't really work, especially for practitioners, to make things happen in the very speedy world that we are in. So yes, there is that need for innovation, for the need for making things different in a network and more cooperative together. But at the same time, practitioners are definitely in need to make things happen at the same time immediately. How can we really bring these two together? Thank you.
Would you like to take up this question?
Yeah.
Too difficult?
I think the public sector is different, as Geert implied, because we are stewards of public money, and in the case of development, the tolerance for failure is in some sense lower for good reason, because people can die if you screw up, if you don't do your work or your. So I think as much as we hear and a lot about the pace of change, as Geert said on his opening slide, a lot of what it takes to do and keep the public sector going is just keeping a lot of the relatively routine things kind of ticking over, and so those don't change, I don't think, too much, and so there is potential for a broader, a longer time frame to be able to work on those kinds of issues. But to me, whether you're working on real pressing problems that need to be solved now or you have longer time horizons, the essence really of what I think both of us are talking about is really creating these cultures of innovation and cultures of learning. I think that's another big thing, that the World Bank has done its own assessments of itself as a learning organization for many decades, and repeatedly, to its credit, faults itself for not being a learning organization, for not taking seriously so much of these disappointments that occur along the way. So for me, and this partly is an answer to the question from Ireland, is just to say part of where ultimately any effective organization that Peter Senge and others have talked about is creating these learning organizations that see these feedback mechanisms as a way we collectively learn. And so the essence of the responding to these challenges is how you create the time and the space to get a whole array of different problems being solved in legitimate ways. And we can't control the speed at which the problems come, we can control the pace at which we respond to them.
Okay.
I would
Just 1
say
minute.
so the routine services are absolutely compatible with COCOCO. The innovation strategies are longer term. It's still applicable, COCOCO, but to a lesser extent. And crisis management, well, if you have to extinguish the fire of Michael's house that is burning, you don't want COCOCO. You want your fire service to go in and do the job. And I think that's actually the different timelines to consider.
Right. One last question goes to the gentleman here.
My name is Sunny Leong. I'm the Chief Executive of Civil Service College based in the United Kingdom. I'd like to follow up on the point that you made that we do not want to leave anyone behind and the development of inclusive policies. But in order to develop inclusive policies, we need to look at the workforce of the public sector. And sometimes our workforce do not reflect the population we serve. And I think public sector needs to be more diverse and needs to be more inclusive from people from disabled and sexual orientation in order for us to be able to develop inclusive policies. So what do the panelists think, in view of all this long list of priorities, when we actually approach government and say, look, we need to have a more diverse workforce, this is normally a low priority. Shouldn't we now think that this should be a high priority now? Thank you.
You're absolutely right. I think those that have a mismatch between the civil service profile and society, they have a huge problem. And so you'd better solve the problem.
I think if you took inclusion seriously, both on the provider side in terms of the demographics of your staff, as it were, but also on the receiving side, it just gets harder and harder to be more and more inclusive. I'm for my sins at the moment, I'm co-leading the next Poverty and Shared Prosperity report that the World Bank will publish in next year. And it's very clear in all of the data that it just trying to actually reach the last 3% of a population is just really, really hard, because those people live in isolated places. They are discriminated against. They sometimes choose to be completely free of obligation to the state. So being truly inclusive on the demand side, as it were, on the people that are receiving things, that's a big capability challenge, actually. It's just not an attitude sense. To have an organization that can actually reach and provide equitable services to literally everybody in a country, man, that's hard. So I just think that's part of why we stress the problem-solving aspect of what it takes to become a highly capable organization, is that you just got to see those kinds of challenges as extensions of of getting the basics right from the start. And you can't run before you can walk. So building up these big organizations and getting them good at doing the things they're supposed to be doing is the prelude then to these much more or different kinds of challenging tasks, which is doing that at scale for everyone, cost effectively. Those are all sort of, to me, the crucial but things and tasks that come later as the machinery of an organization is built up.
Okay, great. I'd like to go on and on. It's not every day we meet these great minds. However, I think if I did that, President Park and others may frown on me, so I think we should wrap it up here. And we have 2 days of conference during which we can discuss these issues in greater length. So let me thank you, the keynote speakers, and thank also the audience for actively participating in this panel discussion. Thank you.